Aloha, I'm Chad Blair, Civil Beat's politics and opinion editor. Welcome to Civil Beat's Know Your Candidate for Congress series. And today joining us is Jill Tokuda. Hi, Jill.
Good to have me here.
Thank you. I've got a lot of questions for you.
Oh boy, all right.
Let me just get through my scripted moments here. Civil Beat, local nonprofit news site dedicated to providing local investigative news across the state. And you can find all of our reporting at civilbeat.org. And if you're looking for more resources on this year's elections, check out our elections guide. I put a lot of work into it. civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. If you go to the homepage, you can't miss it. There's a bunch of tabs there. Mahalo to our event partner, Chaminade University, which, by the way, is just down the road on Wailea from Civil Beat. Yeah, we're across from Timura's, closer than Chaminade is, for supporting this Know Your Candidate series and hosting us in the Clarence T.C. Ching conference room. That is where we are now. We won't be taking audience questions today, but I've got a bunch of questions prepared for our candidate. And Jill, I thought that we would start off is tell us a little bit about your background. What do we need to know about Jill Tokuda?
Well, first of all, thank you for hosting these talk stories. I think it's so important for people really to get to know the names on the ballot. You know, it's more than signs on fences and people waving on the side of the road. But to your point, you know, who are we? You know, what really motivates us. And, you know, as many people know, I did serve in the Hawaii State Senate for 12 years, representing Windward Oahu, Kaneohe Kailua, my home, and still am there. And, you know, for myself, CD2 is particularly personal. 4 generations of our family have called CD2 home, whether it be on the Windward side or working the plantations, Puhi on Kauai, growing up in Pu'unene, my mom's father, being born in Hilo. You know,
you were born in Hilo. I didn't.
No, I wasn't. My grandfather.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
But our family, literally, really, CD2 has been our home, has welcomed us in since we immigrated from Okinawa. And so, for me to be able to give back, pay forward, has really meant a lot to me. You know, and 12 years in the state Senate, was very humbled to be able to chair a number of different committees, and we've had lots of conversations on that.
Oh yeah, looking out over that railing and complaining and talking privately.
There is something to be said about having these conversations on the rail, right? Yeah. And really going through the issues. And so whether it was Ag Hawaiian Affairs or education, you know, Ways and Means.
Right.
Ways and Means was a big one. And the Labor Committee, you know, towards the end, those really not only gave me insight into the issues and what was important for people, but really connected me with communities across the state and allowed me to listen and learn in terms of what were the hopes, what were the struggles, but more importantly, what can we do together to make life better? And so those are 12 very formative years in office. And as you know, been in the private sector almost as much, working with nonprofit organizations, consulting, running my own business. And so there's definitely a lot to me. But first and foremost, I tell everyone, I'm a working mom with 2 boys that I love and adore, going to the same public schools my husband and I went to. I'm going to be a high school mom. Okay, maybe I said that wrong. But
what high school?
Castle High School.
Of course.
Castle High School. Our son, Matt, will be the 4th generation of our family to go to Castle.
Not Kalaheo.
Well, but I always tell Kalaheo grads, I have Kalaheo colors, technically, the orange and the blue, right? So I'm definitely trying to appeal as widely as I can. But next, this coming school year, I've been doing registration the last week. I have got a son at King Intermediate, like we went to, and Castle High School.
How old are the boys now?
They are 12, and one will be 14 next month.
Great.
So.
You know, I did want to ask one question during your tenure at the Ledge, because I know it was really important to your neighborhood over there on the Windward side. Bring us up to date as best as you can. I know you're not responsible, but how is the state hospital? I know there were some problems, but you were instrumental in getting some money to rebuild that structure. And of course, we had that terrible escape that happened. But can you give us a sense? Because it's like literally right across.
I can see it from my window.
Okay.
You know, I will tell you, there is a special place in my heart for the Hawaii State Hospital. And I don't think many people say that. But it took me over 10 years to demolish the existing building, the Goddard building that was there, and to get the money, the $165 million that it took to build a real forensic facility there. And you got to go back to the why. Like, why were we so fixated on breaking down a condemned building that was just sitting in the back, right there at the foothills of the Ko'olaus, and putting up a forensic facility, which means it's going to only hold, you know, patients that were remanded there by the courts, committed a crime. But it really came down to the health and the safety of the surrounding community.
Well, Windward Community College is right there.
Yep. Windward Community College is right there, Castle Hill subdivision, Anchor Church now. I mean, you literally have people walking around playing. My kids would play soccer at the field. The day of the escape, I was at the soccer field with my sons and hundreds of others for the end of the season. You know, I mean, it's real. We're right there. We're mixing
This
in.
is the guy that somehow catches a plane to Maui.
I've never been on a personal jet either, by the way, so I'm a little jealous in that sense. He got to do something I've never done, but literally while he was walking around, I was watching my kids, letting them run around and play. And, you know, so that strikes a lot of fear in every parent. And I remember walking door to door in Castle Hills, and they would tell me, you know, every time there's a helicopter, we worry, did someone else escape?
Yeah.
And people shouldn't be worried about that. People shouldn't live with that kind of fear. And so building a real facility was about the safety of the community, but it was also, if you think back over a decade, the safety of the workers. You know, I would routinely walk through the buildings, listen and talk story with the workers there. It was not a safe environment for people to work there. The sight lines, you know, the conditions in which they were working and living and being able to monitor patients, it was not a safe environment. And you had attacks, as you recall, on staff. Life-threatening attacks in some cases, and that was unacceptable in that manner. And then when you really step back and you looked at the patients and thought of it from, you know, through the lens of humanity as well, it was not a safe and conducive condition for the patients there. And so, you know, some would say, wow, you got 165 million. You could have put it into a school. You could have put it into so many other things. But really, when we looked at people and people mattering, employees and workers there, many who I went to school with, many who are my neighbors, you know, the surrounding community, some that were living in fear, and the patients who some will be living the rest of their life in that facility.
Is it fully functional now? Because I know a couple months ago, the news reports where the water wasn't flowing right from the shower drains and some other things. And I know that you're not in charge of that area. You're not an elected official now.
Yes.
But do you have a sense as to whether it's up and running completely?
You know, I have not been in a position to be able to get access to that information, but I'll tell you, it breaks my heart, because one of the things that I did when we got the 165 million was I made them commit that they would be done in 5 years. Yeah. I mean, too often as well, you see what some of these really big projects that the state or the county has.
Honolulu Rail.
You have got to be on it. I literally would go and watch them through every phase, from remediation of the asbestos to the demolition. I literally had my feet there to make sure they're on it. And I will tell you, part of me feels guilty that I had to leave in 2018 and not see it through, because to me, again, every day that goes by where we're not using it to protect the health and safety of the people who work there, live there, and live around it and go to school there, that's a tragedy. And so I think it's definitely something that continually needs eyeballs on. But I will tell you this as well, the work is not done for the state hospital or many of our public institutions and facilities. Again, thinking of the safety of everyone, especially those communities that live and work and play around it.
Let's move on to the current situation. Of course, obviously you're running for the CD2,
yes.
2nd Congressional District. What led you to drop out of the lieutenant governor's race? I know you have commented publicly, and I realize that Kai Kahele had been toying with the idea of running for governor. He is now. But I wonder whether there was a concern that maybe you couldn't have won that race, which right now, well, I'm just bringing it up. And frankly, it's fairly tightly contested. It looks like it's anyone's game. Sylvia Luke, Ikaika Anderson, Keith Amamiya, Sherry Minor McNamara. But let us hear directly from you about why you decided to drop out of the LG race and go for CD2.
No, and I appreciate that question. And absolutely, it's a tough race looking in at that now very hotly contested, right?
And now the Carpenters are involved.
Well,
but that's another story.
That's another story we could go into with personal experience. But, you know, I will tell you this, and let's go back to when we made the decision. You know, at that particular point, we were actually in a really good place. We were leading in the polls. You know, we were being received with great reception throughout the state, you know, feeling really good about our chances, quite frankly, in the lieutenant governor's race. But for myself, it really came down to the fact that after months and months of going through the state, and I'll tell you, we were spending a lot of time in the neighbor islands.
In the statewide race.
It's a statewide race.
CD2 is all the neighbor islands.
All the neighbor islands, you know, and you know probably just as well as I do, it's about being present and spending time. Developing relationships. And you know, after months of going from community to community, literally from Hanalei, you know, to Hilo, sitting down and listening to folks, for me, it was this overwhelming sense of urgency. Maybe it was my mommy instincts kicking in, but it really was this urgency that if we don't do something now, our greatest export will be our kids and our families. And we've been seeing it even before the pandemic, that sadly, especially in our most rural communities, when it comes to accessing what you and I probably take for granted, healthcare, mental health services, educational opportunities, workforce development, and jobs, housing that we can afford. And I don't even talk about affordable housing, because affordable housing is not affordable, but housing options at all levels of life, whether you're a new couple just starting out, starting a family, or senior, wanting to have a little bit more assisted living options. All of these things at the end of the day, in so many of our rural communities, they are not equal. The access depends on your zip code. And for me, going through the communities, talking with real people, with real lives and real struggles, it really hit home for me that we've got to do something now.
I have to ask you, but why not stay and get the lieutenant governor's job? And maybe it's a stepping stone, as it often is, to governor. Whereas if you're elected to Congress, you're going to be one of 435 people in the House, 535 if you include the Senate. Couldn't you have arguably more of a say in affordable housing, in assisted living for our kapuna and so forth? Because you're going to be in DC, 5,000 miles away.
Absolutely. But I think really going to that point, it takes strong leadership at all levels and in all parts of government. And knowing what I've known, and we've had conversations about this in terms of how federal resources and decisions can really make things happen, be the catalyst for both the state and the county and the private sector. I know that better than anyone.
Well, you were in charge of tracking how that federal money was coming
$22 billion and give or take some change, right? And I think really, especially from that experience these last few years, looking from outside, really seeing how the money flowed and did not flow. Again, I think that really stuck with me, how we have a tremendous opportunity if we have a strong leader in CD2 that has the know-how and the experience to be able to identify where the opportunities are, where the pukas and the cliffs are, and make it happen for our communities and our families.
The name is slipping from my head right now, but what was the name of the organization that you were in charge of that was helping to keep track of?
I was working with the Hawaii Data Collaborative.
That's what it's called, Hawaii Data Collaborative. I'm going to throw out another devil's advocate question, but one of the things you and I have talked about in the past is when Mazie Hirono decided to run for mayor of Honolulu. It looked like Jeremy Harris was going to leave. This is way back.
Yes.
2002. Is that
2002.
There it is.
It was.
And Mazie's headquarters was actually where the Micronesian Mart is now.
Across the convention center.
Which I thought was the strangest organization, except that everybody has to drive, or location rather, everybody has to drive past there.
I'm having some PTSD. Thank you very much.
Right. Okay. And Jill actually was helping Mazie. But Mazie Hirono, our U.S. Senator, one of two, is a mentor to you as well. And then, of course, she ended up switching back and running against Linda Lingle. She was the lieutenant governor at the time, sitting, and she lost. And some people said it was her changing her mind on what race to run for. And I wondered whether that was on your mind at all. Gee, I'm running for LG, but now I'm going to run for CD2. Is that going to look like I don't know, opportunistic, or a politician being opportunistic, right? But I think it's a fair thing to say, because you saw what Mazie went through a front seat role,
and I will tell you this, that a lot of people don't appreciate, because they see the headlines, they see the news stories, the clips, whatever 30 seconds might be on television. But going back to that time and being there personally, I can tell you that so much goes into a decision like that, even what to run for, and a really hard decision to run for something different. This is immensely personal. If you think about it, every elected person, every candidate for office across the tickets, whether it's a state house race or you're running for governor or for Congress, you are sacrificing and giving up quite a bit of your life and your family's life as well. And so it's never an easy decision. So I always tell people it's quick and easy to judge. Oh, that looks like a flip-flop. Oh, are they being opportunistic?
But they don't see what went on behind
the scenes and the considerations that have to go on. And a lot of the discussions are, how can I best serve? And everyone poo-hoos at, no, that's not it. But really, it is about knowing yourself and knowing your strengths, knowing what the needs of the community are, and knowing how you can best marry that together to make impact. And so I think really for myself, that was what this was about. Knowing that there was a path to both lieutenant governor and to Congress. But asking myself at the end of the day, with the experience, the life experience, the public experience that I have, the urgency that I felt, as a mother, as a part of this community, where could I best match my skills and my leadership style with the ability to do good for Hawaii.
This actually segues into the person that you hope to succeed. Kai Kahele, currently representing CD2,
Yes.
now running for governor. And of course, we all know that he hasn't even finished his first term, and he succeeded Tulsi Gabbard, who ended up running for president. And but one of the things Kai Kahele said, and this goes to something you've been talking a lot about, how important being a mother is, and your 2 young boys. He said that he changed his mind about DC, and I'm paraphrasing, on the January the 6th attack, that he was there. He's with his wife. He's got 3 kids, but his 2 young daughters in particular. And that's when he decided, that's it. I want to be back in Hilo. I want to raise my kids back home. And then, of course, this turned into him running for governor. But that must have crossed your mind. He must have called Kai and talk to him about that. That's a big thing for a mother with 2 kids at this age to look at serving in DC for potentially a long time. So how do you address that?
It's interesting. And again, a lot of people don't know the thought process and the conversations that happen behind the camera, right? But I'd actually been approached for a number of years, almost a decade, to consider Congress. From the time my boys were very, very little. And I will tell you that from the very first moment to even just a couple of years ago till this last decision, I had conversations with the boys. We said,
what did they say?
I will tell you about 3-4 years ago, it was, no, mommy, we want to stay here and we don't want you to go. And we laid out what life would be like traveling back and forth for me or them moving. For this one, it really struck me because part of me made some assumptions. Oh, no, they wouldn't want me to run. They wouldn't want to leave. They wouldn't want me leaving. And then my husband asked them. And we had that conversation.
Like around the dinner table or something?
He asked them, and then maybe not the dinner table, but, definitely sitting around together on the couch and the dinner table and the car and many conversations. And they said, we want to live here. We want to go to school here with their friends. But what's the schedule like? When could you come home? Can you come home on weekends? Can you come home during breaks? What your breaks look like? And then they said, can we go to see you? Can we spend our winter break and our fall break with you? And I said, absolutely. And they said, it's okay. We can do this. Wow. We can do this. And I remember my husband telling me very pointedly, because I was having, of course, just, really, we got to think this through. This is a big decision. And he said, whether you're a state senator and chairing WHAM, or whether you're lieutenant governor, or you're in Congress, you'll never be here as much as you want to be, but we'll get through the guilt together. And more importantly, we know that you'll be here when we need you.
Yeah, I know those WHAM hearings went on hour after hour. I sat
We tried to make it a little better. We tried to make it a little less horrible, but it really hit me that at the end of the day, I had my family's support. And I'm not joking. It really was also for me. And I think I told this story before I really started to pitch it to the boys and ask them, what do you think? Can we do this? I was asked out of the blue to read a story at my elementary school that they were going to videotape and play to the whole school as part of kind of a community coming to read, literacy, inspiration. And the principal, Derek Minakami, chose a book for me. And it was basically a story about Patsy Ming's life.
Oh.
8 steps.
Another person that I know that you looked up to
absolutely.
Tremendously. Yeah.
And it was talking about her untraditional path to get to Congress and how much of it was about the steps back that happened, whether it was because she wouldn't get accepted into medical school.
Because she's a woman.
Because she's a female, all these barriers and obstacles that she faced, but how she persevered. Mm-hmm. And I remember one part of the book that I was reading as I was sitting there at my alma mater, Connery Elementary School, knowing my son was in the classroom a few buildings away. And it talked about how the fact that the, Title IX was in the balance. But her daughter, Wendy, was in a serious car accident.
Her
landmark legislation. And she went to her daughter, and Title IX briefly, it died, right? It came back, but she went to be with Wendy. And I remember thinking to myself at that moment, it was almost like she was something you don't have to choose. Sometimes as parents, and especially as mothers, we think we got to choose one or the other. In fact, that's our superpower to me, because every day is a balancing act. And it's about choices. And we understand that it's choices for our kids and our families. And for me, that was almost one of those tipping points to then say, we can do this.
Are you a Marvel or a DC?
Oh, that's
superhero?
an easy question for me. I'm a Marvel. I am an Avengers fan. I even have a favorite. We don't have to go into that. That's really being personal if you
That's
ask me
all right.
which one.
That's all right. Spider-Man or Batman? So Pat Bronco was here sitting in that seat just a couple hours ago, and one of the things that he's argued is someone who's 35 years old, who, to my surprise, I didn't realize that Dan Inouye was that age, and Patsy was similarly young.
Sure.
Patsy, the first woman of color, I believe, to serve in the Congress. He said he's there to commit to CD2 or the House. And what is your commitment? Because we have seen this, I said, Kai Kahele leaving after not even one term, Tulsi looking at the presidency. And there's that concern because seniority is so important. Absolutely. What is your commitment should you be elected to represent the 2nd Congressional District? And I realize things can change down the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, I've told everyone that to me, there's 2 paths in statewide office. There's governor and lieutenant governor, this path. And then there's DC, there's Congress. And to me, when you choose one, you need to really stick to one and commit to one, especially DC. And I'm committed to seniority as part of the delegation and being in DC, because you're absolutely right. We've got to have seniority. You've got to have the relationships, not just within the delegation, but within Congress, and be able to really bring it home for Hawaii the way we saw for so many years. And so my commitment is there. Yes.
Not going to come back and run for governor 4 years?
No, absolutely not.
Let's move to the U.S. House. I know you were up there recently for Emily's List. They've endorsed you, of course. That's a strange building right now there on Capitol Hill. I've been in it a number of times as a reporter. I've sat in the gallery and looked around, but there's some very powerful voices, particularly in the GOP, some very strident voices, and there's a lot of inability. This is really an understatement, but there's a broken system there, and there's not really the bipartisanship that was so evident. Why would you want to go into that room where Marjorie Taylor Greene or any number of these? I mean, there's polarizing figures on the Democratic side as well.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
But that's very different than the state capitol.
Yeah.
You want to do that?
It's interesting when folks bring it up, right? How am I going to approach potentially going into a minority situation when we're coming from literally the bluest blueberry in the Pacific Ocean, right? At one point when I was serving in the Senate, we had one lone Republican, Sam Sloan. I think when I first started out,
there's still just one lone Republican, right?
And when I started, the highest might have been 4 or 5, right? When at one point in the state Senate. So I tell folks sometimes, let's take the partisan label aside. Throw away the D's, the R's, whatever you call yourself. And I said, I will tell you something. Sometimes it's almost harder to get through gridlock and decisions with a big room full of Democrats. Or it's harder to fight even within the family. And so I do think that, having to be effective and work my way through folks that still have the same party label next to me, but are as diverse as you can imagine, it takes really experience on how you're going to navigate with people.
Because you're probably, if the forecast thus far are for the House to fall, that there will be a red wave, that that Pelosi will no longer be Speaker. We'll see. A lot can happen.
Lots can happen.
A lot is happening right now. There's already some indication the Senate might stay in the Democratic control. But it's not just being in a minority, but being in a minority with a majority party that's already looking at conducting investigations into the 1-6 investigation, kind of along the lines of Benghazi. In other words, they want payback for what they see as an unjust political witch hunt, to use Trump's words, against the former president. And I do want to ask about that, but that's going to be a very different mix than dealing with Sam Sloan.
It is, and nothing against Sam, but it's definitely a different level. But
Sam's a reasonable guy.
He can be. He can have his moments, absolutely. But I think more importantly, the lessons I've taken away from the Senate and from working out there in the private sector is it comes down to really being able to identify and create the right alliances and partnerships. Even across the aisles, to be able to get things done. We're 4 people in a delegation for Hawaii. To really make it work how it's historically been able to work is our ability to really find common interests, sometimes even common struggle, from across the country. And how do we bridge what could be political divides and ideological divides at time to really focus in on how we're making sure that Auntie over there in Kahalui gets the help that she needs. She doesn't care about D or R or I or whatever you stick at the end of your name on the sign. She's worried about access to healthcare. because right now she has to fly to Honolulu
Right.
to get it.
Yeah,
You know?
Pat mentioned the same thing. The needs of the rural parts of the neighbor islands so different, and having to come to Honolulu
Yep.
where the quality medical care is, not enough doctors out there. I want to shift to the last week and a half of June of this year,
Mhm.
in which the Supreme Court issued 4 historic, arguably radical decisions regarding school prayer, regarding obviously Roe versus Wade, the abortion overturning. The EPA no longer really allowed to enforce carbon emissions like they used to. And then, of course, there was also the ruling on conceal and carry and guns. What went through your head that last week and a half, especially with
that I'm allowed to say on
because the House, by the way, and I know you know this, is literally right across the street. I mean, it's a little bit of a distance, but it's right across from the Supreme Court. You see it. That's the first thing you see when you walk out, at least on that side of the Capitol.
I would tell you, I was feeling a lot of different things. And you're mentioning that I went to DC
Right.
Right before I made my announcement. And it just so happened that while I was there, the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade was leaked.
So, okay, so this would have been what, May or something?
This was right before May. It was like the last week of April, first week of May.
So it's been leaked, the decision that's going to come out from Alito, which didn't change radically, but so
talk about a punch in the face, right? And the gut. And I remember sitting in my hotel room 2 blocks away from the Supreme Court, and just being overwhelmed with anger, frustration that my nieces were going to grow up in a world with less rights than I grew up in, and how this could absolutely not happen. And I remember calling my husband on the phone and saying, look, GPS me, I'm going for a walk. He's like, it's 12 o'clock at night. where are you going? And I said,
why does he have to GPS you? Are you worried?
Just follow me,
Okay.
just in case.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I told him, I said, and he questioned, where are you going? And I said, I can't stay here. I can't sit still. I can't sit on the sidelines. And I found myself at 12 o'clock till, I don't know, 1:30 in the morning on the steps of the Supreme Court with hundreds of others.
Wow.
And while it was frustration and anger that was definitely there was also hope. Hope in the fact that now people can come together around a common struggle and a common hope for the future and get things done, that we have to make change. We have to be there. And so to your point, all these decisions that we then saw, so many of us, it rocking us to the core here in Hawaii, where we have been on the progressive end, whether it come to reproductive rights and abortion, or it's about, strong gun reform laws here in the state, and the Supreme Court literally blowing us out of the water and setting us back so much. To me, that was a rallying call for me. It was even more so the conviction and validation that I need to be there, because the fight is real. Because as much as we try to take care of Hawaii, and we've passed some of the strongest laws to protect a woman's right to choose and to prevent gun violence and keeping it out of the hands of folks that should not own a gun. At the same time, if we don't counter it at the federal level, if we don't counter in DC, we're not safe here in Hawaii. And more importantly, every other person across the country deserves those same rights and protections.
I do want to get to guns in a moment. I know what you're thinking right now, but let's stay with SCOTUS for a moment. Clarence Thomas, who's in many ways become the most important force on that court, the 6-3 court, really, also brought up in his concurring opinion that maybe gay rights, gay marriage, gay relationships, contraception. Interestingly enough, he didn't bring up interracial marriage. Justice Thomas, married to a white woman. That too is a Supreme Court decision, but that hasn't been brought up. But there is an effort to codify at the federal level, perhaps not with gun control, but they did pass a gun control measure. But we saw the House just this week, including a lot of Republicans joining Democrats saying, maybe gay marriage is the law of the land, and should we touch this at all? It has to get past the Senate, but are you seeing, is that a way possibly to bridge the divide where these commonly held views that a majority of Americans share that could actually find its way into legislation? Because that would be what you would be doing, is passing legislation.
Absolutely. I think, there's, while this is, a tragic moment, historic times, as you mentioned, that we never thought we'd go through, that we fought so hard to get in the first place over decades, is this also an opportunity for all of us, Democrat, Republican, to see ourselves as humans? And the fact that at the end of the day, when we go home to our communities, no matter what state it is, we're surrounded by people. We're there to be a voice for people and families that sometimes don't always think and think like us and agree with us, but deserve the basic humanity of the rights that are right now being stripped away from them. And so I do think that this is a huge opportunity, and how we stand up as adults and leaders and make that real and possible, I think that's the challenge and that's the fight.
When you're campaigning, and I've watched your social media feed, so I know that you've been doing the rounds. Do you have conservative voters coming up to you? Because as you say, there's a lot of diversity, and particularly in the CD2, nearly a third of the electorate voted for President Trump twice here. Are they coming up to you and saying, gee, I'm uncomfortable about abortion, and my faith tells me that I have to be pro-life? How do you respond to someone who's ideologically different and yet you hope to represent?
If you think back, and I was talking to a group this morning on Waianae about this, and I was reminding them that when I first ran in 2006, I was running in a Republican district. Bob Hogue was the senator in that area. In fact, Windward Oahu was largely Republican.
That's true. And in
at
fact,
that time.
He later, a sports guy, right?
Yes.
Bob was, big guy.
He ran for the U.S. Senate.
He ran for Congress, and he might have run for the Senate too, the House. But you're right. I forgot that was a Republican district.
It was a Republican district.
Well, you have the military base there, and the military tends to be more conservative.
Kaneohe and Kailua are very different, ideologically, socioeconomically, right? And so the way it was cut, it was actually it was purple, downright red, right, in that particular area. And so to run for that district, and that was my first run for office, was definitely a challenge. And I will tell you, I believe how I was able to win what was a very tough race. It was one the Republicans did not want to give up. So it was a targeted race for at least the first 2 times I ran. It was really about meeting people where they're at and communicating in a way that they knew. It wasn't about if you're a D or an R. It was how are we going to work together on things, and acknowledging our differences, acknowledging that sometimes we're not going to agree on every particular issue, but what's more important at the end of the day, being willing to listen, keeping that open door. And I do think that approach for me throughout the 12 years that I served, and as I've campaigned, has really done me well and served me well. And so I actually do have a number of folks that would actually identify as Republican that, come and talk with me and have been supportive, knowing that at the end of the day, ideologically, we differ on a number of things. But to me, the approach, how I treat people, the fact that we've got to be able to sit down with respect, regardless of where we stand on certain issues, and find that common ground. What are we going to do together? And we're in Hawaii, if you think about it. It's a small island. We can't be burning bridges and closing doors, because chances are we're going to need each other's help at one point or another. And so how do we treat each other with civility and respect, and not partisan divide? And I think if we have that come to Congress, we could see a lot more effectiveness and work happen.
I want to see how you dealt with an issue that was very difficult for you. And I know because I think I actually got the scoop on that. When you were really booted from the Ways and Means chair. It is the most powerful, or one of the top 2 positions in the Senate, certainly in the legislature. And it was in the last week or so, if I recall.
Yes.
How did you deal with that? Because I mean, I know that Jonathan Dela Cruz had a lot to do with it. He was your vice chair. He's now running WHAM, but that must have been crushing for you. And I ask this because you're going to go to a place where the politics is even tougher.
Sure.
And so, what did you learn from that?
Oh, we could spend the whole hour on that particular question, but
we'll talk afterwards.
The behind the scenes stuff. But I will say this, and I think you could ask any Ways and Means or any finance chair, anyone who's been in a position of leadership.
Josh Green got booted from the health committee.
I mean, and they will tell you that taking on the tough challenges, like chairing Ways and Means, like being responsible for the entire state budget and every bill that comes through the legislature with money impact, which is most of the bills, you know that you're taking on that huge responsibility, and that there are always going to be, consequences, whether deserved or not, right? Not everyone's going to love your decision, but you've got to go in there, make the best decision possible, take a stand for people and communities. And sometimes they'll work out for you, and sometimes they won't, And I think you really enter knowing that this is not, for me at least, taking on WHAM was not about job security. It wasn't about keeping power, getting power, and holding on to power. It was about being in a position to make the most difference. And I'm probably going to take a little bit more time than I should on this issue, but I actually tell people, and I talk to kids about this as well, I take you back to the session before I got the Ways and Means chair. I was the education chair at that point. And I don't know if you recall this, but it was a very interesting session because that year, almost all the education bills died in conference. because we followed the rules and we stayed in our committee hearing room and we were told you didn't
Your
have
bills
release.
died.
A lot of bills died. And then I ran over and found in one big conference room every other committee
I remember
had
this.
gathered.
I remember.
Irate because we were told that's the rules. The rules were you stay in your room and that's where you were supposed to vote because that's where the public could know that they could go and see you vote at that time. And I was furious at that point. And we actually got a couple bills to survive after that point. A few rose from the ashes
Right.
and historically passed on a Monday. Really important ones that dealt with special ed, that dealt
The
with
last
charter
week of
schools.
session.
The last
Very
week of session, the
unusual.
last couple days of session
Right.
that were so critical. But I remember sitting back in that hearing room and telling Roy Takumi, the House chair at that time,
Former ed chair.
former ed chair, he was education chair, my counter at that point. I remember telling him, if we want to do good, if we want to make things happen, we're going to have to get uncomfortable and we're going to have to go where we can really control how the decisions are made and that they're done right.
Okay.
And so I told him, I'm going to leave you and I'm going to go run for WHAM. I'm going to go for the WHAM seat. Because again, it's how can we create the environment that was, done right, done well in terms of decisions, and you can really make things happen for those issues that you care about.
So are you a tougher person for having been unceremoniously dumped from WHAM? Because it's not going to be pretty in Congress.
No, it's not going to be pretty in Congress, but if you think about the why, taking a stand on rail funding.
It was the rail funding bill in particular.
And wanting to make sure at the end of the day, why I do support rail. I support rapid transit as transportation equity for our families and for communities, for workers who absolutely need it. Need it especially now with gas prices being the way it is. But it was not about having a blank check on the backs of our kids. It was about making sure that we did build rail, but we did it right.
Yeah.
And,
and you and Sylvia set limits on the TAT and the GET, but not to the
making
lightning.
sure that we had answers from everyone involved in terms of making sure that it wasn't going to balloon billions and billions of dollars over as we had seen. And so, the lessons learned is when you step up, there are always going to be hits and slaps. It's more so, how do you pick yourself back up?
Yeah.
That's the real question. How do you respond and go forward and learn from it? And that definitely was a huge life lesson for me in terms of.
Because I got another question for you along the same lines.
Okay.
Your opponent has hit you for the NRA giving you a letter B grade, a favorable rating, the National Rifle Association. He has hit you for answering a questionnaire for the NRA. And now we have a super PAC spending money, essentially tying you with the massacres that we've seen in the mainland. And frankly here, the Xerox shooting as well. But in fact, that is not what your own record shows. But that must have really upset you tremendously. Did you call Pat and say, why are you hitting me on this? Was it a fair attack to bring up the NRA?
And quite frankly,
you did answer the questionnaire.
I will say this. I don't know how the NRA and the Hawaii Riflemen's Association come up with their rating system and their endorsement. This was over a decade ago, to the best of my knowledge. I don't recall even filling out a questionnaire, but I will say this. I've never sought out the NRA's endorsement or approval. Why would I? When you take a look at my record of votes, the over a dozen bills that we passed into law during my time of service, part of Senate leadership, we have passed some of the strongest gun laws in the country, whether it be red flag laws, whether it be prohibiting bump stocks and trigger activators, whether it's, again, making sure that folks that are, involved in sexual assault, domestic violence, mental health, they do not get their hands on a firearm. It's immediately confiscated. They cannot own a gun. To me, you take a look at my record. And in fact, I think that's what the commercial said. We have to judge her by her record. Judge me by my record. I will match my record up against anyone. 12 years of making sure that we pass bills that keep our community safe. That's what I stand by. And I will tell you that I was absolutely disgusted as a mother and mad. And I try to be happy all the time. I try to keep very happy, I'll tell you, but I had a hard time holding it together. When you have pictures of Uvalde on that commercial, how dare you? How dare you? To any parent out there, every single one of us, how dare you even try to make the connection? When all of us, when these happen, we want to run home and hug our kids. So the fact that you will, bash my reputation, mischaracterize me and my record, but more importantly, make this association that somehow I would do something to hurt kids and families. How dare you? And I not just put that on vote vets and the folks that are plugging almost $1 million of dirty outside money, dark money into the state to try to control our elections, but I also put it on Patrick Bronco. And shame on you. We got to do better. When we look at DC, we want better for our state and our country. So we've got to run that same kind of campaign. We've got to present that same kind of leadership to say we're going to rise above the fray, the January 6s. This is not how you do it, by putting on your campaign website a roadmap for special interests, out-of-state super PACs to be able not just support you, but to do that by pushing down the people who are also running for office.
You do have some out-of-state mainland PACs supporting
Sure.
you. Emily's list is right at the top. I think they gave $5,000. If I checked, heavily influential.
Yep.
Fair Shot PAC, that's about leadership. Policy is Personal PAC.
Yep.
Progressive, their website right now features someone with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt.
Yeah.
The Congressional Progressive Caucus has donated as well.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like from Open Secrets, you got about 7% of your money, at least according to the latest filing from these PACs. Is there any way you can just turn that down and say, I'm going to send that check back because I don't want that perception that I'm being influenced by this PAC money?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I would tell you what I have not taken and committed to is no corporate PAC money, and that's something that I felt was really strong. If you think about even my race for lieutenant governor, it was about walking the walk when it comes to campaign reform and reinstilling trust in government as well. So our campaign does not take corporate PAC money. And you're right, I would say 10% or less of the funds that we've raised have come from out of state. But you know what, I would tell you this, I am so proud of the fact that 90% of the money that we've raised has come from Hawaii. Because that's really hard money to raise. That's trust to be earned. That's confidence to be earned. And if we're going to earn it anyway, it better be from the people that we hope and we're humbly asking to represent.
Because your colleague, should you join Mazie Hirono and Ed Case, assuming he's reelected, and Brian Shantz, assuming he's reelected, they do take that money and they take it in heavy, large amounts from a variety of sources, much more than 10%. In fact, the argument is if you don't take that money, you're not going to be able to serve in Congress because you're not going to get elected.
It's a difficult thing.
I mean, especially, what if you're in 2 years and that money starts coming your way? A defense contractor, a major telecommunications company.
We're committed not to take corporate PAC money, as I said. And again, for me, as it's been with all of my races, it's spending time in the community. And maybe that might make me a horrible fundraiser or campaigner or what it is, but it's really about, to me, spending time in our communities, listening, talking, connecting. Again, earning that trust, and in many cases, $5 from everyday people who just want to know that they have a voice. They have someone who, shares their hopes for the future. And I often tell people, for me, what's so important, people have gotten ballots in the mail. Literally, they're checking off ballots. They're turning them in right now. In my real hope is when you're looking at that ballot, when people are picking up their ballots and they see my name, I really want them to not just see me. More importantly, I want them to see themselves. I want to see them to see that this is about the future we all want together. And that means I got to spend the time out there, connect with people and really earn that trust and support from them.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the 1-6 committee. The GOP is already saying, as I indicated, that there'll be payback if they take over the House. This just broke. It appears that the Department of Justice is now, in fact, has in a criminal probe into former President Trump and what happened with the election. What are your thoughts about what happened with the former president and what should be done? Because to try, remember Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, and this gentleman was impeached twice, at least by the House, not the Senate. But that's a really dramatic development if the Department of Justice should formally pursue, as it appears to be, according to these reports. Where do you stand on what the committee's been doing and what Trump did?
Well, I will say this. I remember being in my living room on January 6th. It should have been us watching a regularly occurring formality in terms of being able to take in the votes and confirm the election, and being absolutely horrified at what I was seeing. I lived in DC for 4 years. I went to George Washington University. I studied there. When you go away to school, you kind of consider that like your college home, your second home to some extent. And I was horrified. I was heartbroken to see my city torn up apart like that. But more importantly, the halls of democracy and government, just for it to be trashed, disrespected in that way, that was an assault on democracy. It was an assault on everything that we believe in as a country, as people. And so for me, it is about, we've got to make sure that this never happens again. And we teach our kids this the same thing. There are consequences to your actions. And we've got to make sure that those that perpetrated that day, instigated that day, were involved there, they need to be held accountable.
Do you think that
for those
President
actions.
Trump is accountable?
He needs to be held accountable and responsible for his actions. And I know it's a very bold statement, but how are we supposed to turn to our kids and say, hey, you have to, there's consequences to your actions. You do something wrong, there will be a punishment. There's a cause and effect.
You could very soon find yourself serving with Kevin McCarthy as the House Speaker, and people who do think the election was stolen, that it is a witch hunt, that this commission, even though it has 2 Republicans on it, is a witch hunt, to use the president's terms. And you're going to be, you're publicly saying.
And there's no way that there's an easy answer or a situation to that. Yeah. But it is about then dealing with folks on those issues that we can agree on. But at the same time, I think when it comes to the foundations of our democracy, when it comes to letting our state and our country know what we stand for and what we're willing to protect, we've got to sometimes draw hard lines a bit. As soft as we can, but we have to take a stand. Maybe not lines, let's not call it a line. We have to take a stand for what's right. We have to set that example. If not, we're basing everything that goes forward from here on very shaky grounds.
Okay. I want to talk about President Biden. He's nearly 80 years old. He is the oldest serving president. There is already talk among the Democratic Party that perhaps he should not be the nominee in 2024 because of his age, concern that President Trump may run again too. But I mean, where do you stand on that? I know it's a difficult thing to ask you, but a lot of people are starting to say, because my next question is, who do you see in your Democratic Party as the party leader? Should Mr. Biden not run again?
Yeah.
Is he too old to be president?
I will never be accused or support any kind of ageism that exists. Quite frankly, there are so many in our community, regardless of age. And we started off this conversation about age and youth. At the same time, there is value and wisdom to those that have been in government and working in government as well. And so, I would never be one to judge anyone on the basis of age. I think if we discriminate in that way, then how can we say that we stand against discrimination for gender, for race, for sexual orientation as well?
But his poll numbers are extremely low, and we're looking at a historic red wave. Again, we'll see what happens come November.
But is it because of his age?
Well, why do you think he's so unpopular?
I think these are difficult times. Really find someone who is popular at this particular point in our history, because we are at a crossroads, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's economic recessions, whether it's inflation, whether it's global strife.
Well, let me ask you about inflation, because the Democrats do control the House and Senate and the presidency, not the Supreme Court. But many people are blaming Joe Biden for inflation and saying that is a reason to punish the Democratic Party. And does the president own some of that responsibility, or is that unfair?
I have to say it's unfair. I think at the end of the day, and this again is just coming from my own experience, that especially when you take it, issues like that, there is always blame to go around. It's never on the hands of any one particular body. For me, it's also about how do we all look in the mirror and see how we have contributed to where we are today. But more importantly, because I think it's time wasted and lost spent on casting blame and dispersions. It's where are we going to go from here to really start to ease up the burdens, the cost of living that people are facing right now in our communities. If you take a look just in our own state, and I think your polls have shown it, cost of living affordability is the biggest issue families are facing right now, whether it's being able to pay rent. I've talked to people on Hawaii Island that say, it costs so much to put gas in my car to get to work. I'm limiting the days I work
But what can you do if you get in Congress? What can you do to adjust the cost of living to bring the cost down?
I think it's
here?
I think it's about really focusing on those measures that keep more and put more in people's pockets. And so I do think, and I've stated this before, whether it is to, eliminate temporarily the gas tax right now and cap it so that we really start to see, savings at the pump when people are starting to go in there and put their gas in to get to work. That's critical. Emergency rent and utility support that we saw hundreds of millions coming into Hawaii that really helped to keep people sheltered.
Of course, some have argued that that's the reason why inflation is so high, is all that money that's gone into, and mind you, it saved a lot of businesses and helped a lot of people get by, the paycheck protection. But there is an argument that you put too much money into the system, and that's the reason why the Fed has had to act concerning interest rates. And hence it was Joe Biden at the helm. So let me just shift gears. Do you see other people in the Democratic Party that are promising as future leaders, people that are already well known, perhaps in the Biden administration, people that you like? Can you name 2 or 3?
I hate giving names at this particular point, especially given the sensitivities about it and the fact that, as you've pointed out, we're going to be heading towards what will likely be another heavily contested, controversial presidential election. Yep. I think more importantly, what we've really got to have in that person, I like to think of the characteristics, is a person who will really bring balance and civility back to our party. It's really sad that right now, more so it's about the titles, whether it's progressive or conservative or blue dog or whatever you want to name it, and where we fall on the Democratic spectrum. How are we going to have someone that really unites us? And more importantly, responds to the people in the communities. I mean, the fact, as you mentioned at one point, that even in Hawaii, that's considered one of the bluest states, never a question as to who we'd elect as a president, we had more people turn out for Trump, if I'm not mistaken, in 2020.
It was about 28, 29, 30. Mm-hmm. It was a pretty high percentage.
It was a pretty high percentage, and a bit of a surprise to people. And to me, I think that is a rallying point, and a stop moment for us as Democrats. And we have to ask ourselves, well, why are people migrating away from the Democratic Party? Why are they looking to candidates like Trump, leaders like Trump? What are we not doing? What are we missing? What are we not listening to? So I think what we need in a president and a leader and leaders right now are folks that recognize our obligation and responsibility to really represent and earn the confidence and vote of all of our people. Okay. If not, we will continue to see an erosion, sadly, and division within our party and within our country.
Speaking of erosion, and we've only got about 8 minutes left, a website. This is from your website on climate change, because it really is, as I have always said, an existential issue. Although there's another issue that many Republicans deny as real, including friends of mine. We need clean energy to power us in the future. We need the positive economic impacts of clean energy. Environmental policy and economic prosperity should go hand in hand. We also have a significant military presence, and you think that we could benefit from the efforts to have the DoD, Department of Defense, lead in areas to reduce energy and our carbon footprint. And yet, as you well know, we import certainly almost all of our food and a good chunk of our energy, although we have made some progress towards that 2045 goal. But then you got a guy like Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat from West Virginia, who's saying, put a kibosh on the climate change bill because gas prices are $5.50 a gallon here in the island. So how do you persuade these guys that, we have houses rolling into in the ocean on the North Shore,
To your friends who don't believe it's real, have them come to Hawaii and take a look at
the friends in Hawaii.
Okay, that's a little. They clearly don't live beachside homes either. But the fact is, we are on the doorsteps of climate change. Right. If you think about it, and I've seen it literally flying through these islands. I mean, whether it be erosion and homes falling into the ocean, which, by the way, Windward Side, many of them, highway, CD2 right there. Or whether all of those, we've seen the warning signs for years.
Right.
And sadly, this is one where we have not acted with that urgency that I talked about. But definitely you see that they're flying over the islands and seeing the impacts of drought, seeing the impacts of invasive species, salinity in soil, king tides, literally.
You've convinced me. How are you going to convince those guys, men and women, who don't think it's happening? That it's cyclical and that we had ice ages and it's this and that and so forth.
And I wish I could tell you that the facts should persuade them and the data and the science should persuade them, but everyone has tried that as well. But I think it is about how do we make Hawaii the tip of the spear in really focusing in on those industries that, quite frankly, we know we're going to need, looking at 2050, 2060. I really love, there was a future study report that the University of Hawaii did to kind of cast out what life might look like in 2060, given the fact that climate change is real and it's going to be about mitigation, whether it be food. And how are we going to be able to grow food with rising salinity, drought?
It may require moving inland.
Inland, different kind of growing methods, energy. All of these different things, king tides, where are our homes going to go? Where are our roads going to go? Transportation, everything, given all of these things we're seeing.
So how do you convince a coal miner from West Virginia that this is a problem?
First and foremost, invest in Hawaii. Invest in industry here, invest in academia here, to really start to focus on making sure that those industries, those things that we need to mitigate climate change, Hawaii will be ready, and Hawaii will be ready to lead and be example for the rest of the country. And as you've seen, we've done that, whether it be our 100% renewable goal, Paris Agreement, codifying it. Now it's where the rubber meets the road, and us taking the, being that tip of the spear for energy, for food production, all of these things.
And by the way, we could, as we all know,
Yes.
I could have kept talking to Pat on and on because I enjoy it so much and I'm so grateful. But we just have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Two quick things.
All right.
What's ahead for you in these next 2.5, 3 weeks? Because this is it. This is crunch time. Primary's coming.
Yes.
What's your calendar look like?
Well, clearly no sleep and a lot of caffeine. So that's, I will tell you, and I'm not even joking, that one of the first things I do when I step foot on every single neighbor island, I'm there, different islands, 3 or 4 different islands per week, easy, is finding coffee. So if you need a good coffee recommendation on any island, any community, I can even tell you where it is on Lanai. I am your person.
Well, I hope it's Kona coffee when you're on the big island.
Yes.
So, okay. All
Although
right.
I'm also a big fan of Ka'u, so I don't discriminate. I try them all at that point. But literally, I really want to start this, end this campaign the way I started. And as if you recall, the first 10 days of me from announcing on Mother's Day was to show up on every single island and be present. And let people know face to face that I want to earn their vote, their trust. I want to listen to them. And I want to make sure that they know that this election, this campaign, why I'm running, is about us collectively. And so you will find me on every island in every community, whether it's Windward, Oahu, highly caffeinated. I was in Waianae early today, and I'll be back in Kaneohe, obviously, to go home this evening. But you will find a very highly caffeinated, happy candidate out there campaigning.
Just quickly, any final thing? I know there's a million things we're going to talk about, but any final point? I do want to give you the last word before I read the closing credits here. Yeah. So anything else that we haven't got to?
We've gone through a lot, but I would say that for me, I really hope people know that the reason I'm running, my why, is all of our kids and our families. At the end of the day, someone asked me a very interesting, in fact, I think it was one of your speed round questions that was asked, what would you want to be remembered by, at the end of your service? And I said, I really hope that people will see me as a mom who really saw every single person in this state as family and treated them like family. And to me, that is at the core of why I'm running. That's why when I have these affronts and these negative ads, it really hits me hard when there's questions about that. Because to me, my motivation has always been about how can we take care of everyone like family, because every single person deserves to have people in office that treat them with that way, that gives them that hope that at the end of the day, when we need help, when we have a dream and a goal, we've got a champion and an advocate in their corner. And that's why I'm running, that's why I'm fighting. And I'm humbly asking for people's support on August 13th to get me then to the general and on to Congress to fight for Hawaii.
Jill Tokuda, Mom for Congress, thank you for joining us for today's discussion. And thanks to the audience out there and here for joining us for this Know Your Candidate event series. Mahalo to our event partner, Chaminade University, for supporting the series as well and hosting us here in the Clarence T.C. Ching Conference Room. I hope you'll join me next week. A week from now, I'm going to interview the 2 leading Democrats for the CD1 race, Ed Case and Sergio Alcobilia. And finally, go to our website, check out our elections guide, civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. And thank you to everybody. And Jill, take care. Good luck. We will be in touch. We can
yes.
We got our boosters. We're fine. So take care, everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.